The air in the hall smelled of old books, polished wood, and the faint aroma of victory. I, Ilaria, had just finished celebrating the publication of my latest academic work, a tome years in the making, the culmination of my research into literary authenticity and textual integrity. The reception was elegant, warm, filled with colleagues, friends, and admirers. My manuscript had been praised for its rigor, its insight, and its unflinching honesty. Finally, I had achieved a triumph that no one could take from me. Or so I thought. Rhys, my boyfriend and publisher, raised a glass toward me, the clink of crystal ringing faintly against the soft murmur of conversations. His smile was familiar, almost intimate, but there was an edge beneath it that I hadn't noticed until now. He leaned in, the scent of his cologne mingling with the ink and wine around us. "The book rights revert entirely to the publisher, Ilaria," he said, the words deliberate and chilling. He maintained a casual smile, though his eyes were sharp, calculating. "And Serena will take over your editorial position. She understands that business is about profit, not pretentious literary theory. Your moral high ground was becoming fiscally inconvenient." I froze, glass in hand, the fine wine blurring slightly as the room seemed to spin. Betrayal doesn't announce itself. It sneaks, it deceives, it comes dressed in familiar warmth and trust. I had been blind to the betrayal in plain sight. Rhys and his sister Serena, partners in manipulation, had carefully orchestrated the takeover of my intellectual property. My research, my insights, my very name attached to years of scholarship, they were being stolen from me by the two people I had trusted most. I felt a cold wave pass through me, a sensation that was almost physical. It was not just anger or shock. It was the death of the world I thought I had built, one paragraph, one footnote at a time. I watched Serena across the room, her expression innocuous to anyone else, but familiar to me as predatory, calculating, and entirely too young to be so ruthless. She smiled at a guest, tilting her head with a deceptive innocence that masked her ambition. She had always envied me, always desired the position, and now she had it, all facilitated by Rhys's betrayal. I set my glass down, the weight of the moment pressing against my chest. The crowd laughed, toasted, celebrated, but I could only see the cracks beneath their veneer, the lies threaded through the very foundation of my work. Every congratulatory comment, every pat on the back, felt like mockery. The people who should have admired the integrity of my scholarship were cheering for the profit-driven deceit my own partner and his sister had orchestrated. As I left the reception, I walked through the familiar corridors lined with shelves of ancient manuscripts and rare first editions. Their leather-bound spines smelled like centuries of human thought, of voices that transcended time. And I realized, standing among them, that I had a choice. I could mourn what had been taken, or I could act. "I will ensure their entire publishing house is discredited," I whispered to myself, the words firm, resolute. "Every fraudulent text, every plagiarized passage, they will be exposed." And just like that, I knew the mission that would consume my life had begun. The betrayal was not the end. It was the beginning. My intellect, my foresight, and my commitment to truth would be my weapons. Rhys and Serena had underestimated me, thinking desire and trust could blind a scholar's eye. They had no idea that I could see beyond the surface, beyond the lies. Later that evening, as I returned to my apartment surrounded by my research notes and manuscripts, the weight of anger transformed into focus. I pored over every page, analyzing contracts, cross-referencing claims, and noting the subtle ways Serena had been groomed to replace me. Every step they had taken to undermine me was documented, every misstep logged. I would not fail, not this time. The spark of vengeance was lit, but beneath it, a quieter purpose formed: integrity. This was not just about reclaiming my work, it was about protecting the truth of the written word. And somewhere, deep in the shadows of this betrayal, I felt a faint glimmer of hope, a possibility of an unexpected ally. Someone who respected the sanctity of the text, who could help me expose the rot behind the public facade. But first, I had to plan, to act, and to survive the storm Rhys and Serena had set in motion. The battle lines were drawn, and I, Ilaria, would write the first chapter of their downfall with precision and ruthlessness. When I opened my eyes, the fluorescent ceiling lights hummed above me like a chorus of uneasy ghosts. For a moment, I thought I was still at the reception, still drowning in betrayal and wine, but the room around me was too bright, too full of life. Students crisscrossed the mezzanine, carrying stacks of journals and laptops. The scent of fresh paper, strong coffee, and youthful ambition filled the air. I blinked, disoriented, until my gaze fell on the calendar pinned above the librarian's desk. September 1st, 2018. My breath caught. My pulse hammered a wild rhythm against my ribs. It couldn't be. I wasn't just disoriented. I was back. Years earlier. Before Rhys ever smiled at me that way. Before Serena ever stole my work sentence by sentence. Before I ever handed over my heart or my manuscripts to people who saw value only in exploitation. I stood abruptly, knocking over a stack of literary journals. The sound echoed through the quiet library, but I didn't care. My hands trembled as I touched my face, my clothes, my hair, everything younger, fresher, untouched by betrayal. 21-year-old Ilaria. Before the disaster. Before my death. If this was real, if I had another chance, then I already knew my first step. Find Jasper. He was the one person who had never compromised integrity for fame. Rhys mocked him for it, actually. Called him the monk of manuscripts, a man too ethical to survive in modern publishing. Rhys had tried to buy his small publishing house more than once and failed. Jasper always chose independence over profit, truth over convenience. He would listen. He had to. I grabbed my messenger bag, filled it with the journals on plagiarism standards and editorial ethics, not because I needed them, but because the weight of them grounded me. They were familiar. Steady. Like Jasper. When I arrived at the small publishing house downtown, I spotted him exactly where I remembered he preferred to be, not in an office, but at a long, cluttered table in the center of the workspace. Manuscripts surrounded him in what looked like organized chaos. Red pens, sticky notes, style guides, coffee mugs half full and forgotten. He looked almost ethereal in the morning light, tall but relaxed, with dark hair that fell slightly into his eyes. His concentration was absolute as he scanned a paragraph, brow furrowed, lips pressed lightly together as if weighing every word. I swallowed. Approaching him felt like stepping into the first page of a brand new book. Jasper? My voice cracked despite my best effort. He looked up. His expression shifted from mild curiosity to polite attentiveness, and then something else, something deeper, when he noticed the intensity in my eyes. Yes, he asked gently. His voice was calm, smooth, almost soothing. I sat across from him, leaning forward. Rhys's new star author is a fraud, I whispered. The book he's releasing next month, it's plagiarized. Entire passages stolen from an out-of-print anthology. I can prove it now. Jasper blinked slowly, his gaze sharpening like a blade. That's a massive accusation. He studied me, searching my face, my posture, my breath. You know this for certain? I know every page, I said. I traced it once. I can trace it again. His brow softened, not with disbelief, but with the weight of what this meant. Why bring this to me, he asked. Why not go to your own publisher? I inhaled. Because you respect the source material, I said, echoing words I had once spoken years in the future. And Rhys and Serena profit from lies. Something flickered in Jasper's eyes, recognition, maybe admiration, though faint. He sat back, folding his arms, letting silence stretch between us. But there was no distance in it. Just thought. Finally, he nodded. Show me. My heart fluttered. Not romantically, not yet, but with relief, so warm it almost felt like sunlight on my skin. I reached into my bag, pulling out photocopies I had made years ago, copies that somehow existed with me here, in this new timeline. Jasper leaned closer to examine them, our shoulders almost touching. His presence was steady, grounding. When his hand brushed mine as he took the pages, a soft spark raced along my skin, gentle, unexpected, but unmistakable. He didn't pull away immediately either. Instead, his fingers lingered a heartbeat longer than necessary. His eyes lifted to meet mine, and for a moment, the world went quiet. "Ilaria," he said softly, "this could expose the entire foundation of their house." "That's the point," I breathed. "Their empire was built on stolen pages. It's time for the truth to rewrite the ending." He offered a small, sincere smile, rare but warm. "Then we'll do it together." And in that moment I knew this wasn't just a second chance. It was the beginning of a new story. One where I did not stand alone. One where Jasper, ethical to the core, would become my ally, and something deeper I could already feel forming, like the first sentence of a love story waiting to be written. The library was quiet that evening, the kind of silence that presses against your ears until every whisper, every breath feels amplified. I traced my fingers along the spines of journals, running my hand over embossed letters, scanning titles like a code only I could read. It smelled of old paper, leather, and something more. Potential. The potential to rewrite what had been stolen from me, and perhaps to protect the fragile integrity of literary truth. Jasper sat at a long wooden table near the center, stacks of manuscripts rising like tiny towers around him. He was bent over a notebook, red pen in hand, scribbling corrections and notes with a meticulousness that made my heart stutter, not from embarrassment, but from admiration. There was a rhythm to the way he worked, deliberate yet fluid, like a conductor guiding a symphony I was only beginning to hear. I cleared my throat softly, careful not to startle him. Though he looked up immediately, eyes sharp and dark, catching mine with an intensity that made my pulse jump. He had a way of looking at you, as if he could see the words you carried inside, the hidden margins of your thoughts. "Are you ready?" I asked, lowering my voice to a whisper. He tilted his head slightly, curiosity flickering across his expression. "Always." I spread the photocopies I had brought across the table, each page carefully annotated, highlighting the plagiarized passages and footnotes that had been erased or altered. Jasper leaned in, his shoulder brushing mine. The contact was accidental, but it sent an unexpected thrill through me, a subtle warmth that contrasted sharply with the cool sterility of fluorescent light and ink. "These citations don't match any known sources," I explained, tracing my finger along a line of text. "And the style. Anyone who reads widely could catch the inconsistencies. But Rhys won't notice. Serena will cover it." Jasper's brow furrowed as he scanned the documents. His lips pressed together in that concentrated way he had, a habit that made me want to lean closer, to be near him even more. "This is massive," he murmured. "If we publish these findings, it could destroy their credibility. But it also makes us targets." I nodded. I felt a thrill at the danger. Years ago, I had been too naive to confront it. Now, armed with foresight, I could navigate the risks. "I know the consequences," I said quietly. "But the truth is worth it. Every fraudulent page they've published will be exposed. And no one else can do it like we can." He looked at me, eyes steady, piercing, and for a heartbeat I thought he might see more than just the documents in front of us. Our hands brushed again as he reached for a page, and this time, neither of us moved away. The electricity was subtle, almost imperceptible, but undeniable. "Ilaria," he said, finally, voice low, measured. "You've thought this through." "I have to," I admitted. "I won't let them take what's mine, or what belongs to the integrity of the text." We worked in silence after that, the library around us fading as we combed through notes, cross-referencing every suspicious citation, every altered footnote, every manipulated editorial decision. It was methodical, exhausting, exhilarating. Hours passed unnoticed, the shadows lengthened, and the golden lamplight cast his face in a glow that made my chest tighten. At one point, Jasper paused and looked at me, his dark eyes softer now. "I've never met someone so committed to the truth," he said. His hand rested lightly on mine, a silent connection that wasn't just professional. My heart raced, not from fear, but from the closeness, from the warmth that seeped into me like sunlight through library windows. I swallowed, words catching in my throat. I couldn't do this without you, I confessed. The truth wasn't just about plagiarism anymore. It was about the man beside me, steady and unwavering, who somehow made the world feel safer and more possible. He gave a faint, almost imperceptible smile, and for a moment, time slowed. "And I wouldn't want to," he whispered, fingers brushing mine as he reached for another document. That fleeting contact left a spark that neither of us acknowledged openly, but it lingered in the air between us like a punctuation mark at the end of a sentence, waiting to be finished. We continued working late into the night, hands occasionally brushing, shoulders occasionally touching, hearts gradually sinking in the quiet intensity of shared purpose. Among the journals, manuscripts, and flickering desk lamps, a subtle bond began to form, one of trust, passion for truth, and something deeper, quietly growing, unspoken but undeniable. By the time we packed up our notes, I realized something profound. The story we were writing wasn't just about exposing Rhys and Serena. It was about us, about the beginning of something careful, steady, and true. And for the first time in years, I allowed myself to hope that perhaps, this time, justice and love could coexist. The library smelled of ink and old paper, comforting in its constancy, yet deceptive in its quiet. Evening had settled over the city, and the streets outside glimmered with scattered lights, reflections dancing on rain-slicked pavement. Inside, the library's hushed corridors felt like a secret world, one where time moved differently, stretched and intimate. Jasper and I worked side by side, though the space between us seemed charged with something I couldn't yet name. We had traced the fraudulent passages, identified their original sources, and compiled proof that would dismantle Rhys and Serena's carefully constructed facade. Each revelation was a small victory, yet with every step closer to exposure, the risk increased. "You've cross-referenced every footnote?" Jasper asked, voice low, tinged with incredulity. His dark eyes flicked up from the spreadsheet as his hand brushed mine while reaching for another journal. The contact was brief, almost accidental, yet it sent a shiver along my arm. I refused to pull away. "I've double-checked them all," I whispered, leaning closer so our shoulders touched. "I can't let them escape this." He studied me for a long moment, as if weighing the fire in my eyes. "You're fearless," he murmured. There was admiration in his tone, but also something softer, more intimate, that made my stomach twist. Hours passed like minutes. We worked silently, occasionally speaking in whispers, sharing insights, hypotheses, and notes in the margins of printed manuscripts. My hand occasionally brushed his as we reached for the same document. Each touch lingered, subtly magnified in the stillness around us, drawing a warmth I hadn't expected in the midst of such danger. At one point, Jasper leaned back, rubbing his temple. "They'll suspect soon," he said, voice quiet but tense. "Serena has eyes everywhere, and Rhys, he isn't as oblivious as we hope." I met his gaze, the library's shadows painting his features in sharp relief. "Then we'll be ready. We can't let them intimidate us." The words carried more than just determination. They carried an unspoken confession. I trusted him. I relied on him. More than I should, perhaps. He smiled faintly, the corner of his mouth twitching, almost shy. "You know," he said, lowering his voice further, "if we survive this, I'd like to celebrate with wine. Maybe, somewhere quieter than a library." Heat flushed my cheeks. I swallowed, caught between professionalism and the strange, thrilling pull toward him. "I'd like that," I whispered. The sound of my own voice startled me with its vulnerability, yet I didn't regret it. Minutes later, our hands met again, this time not by accident. We reached simultaneously for a ledger, fingers brushing, and neither of us withdrew. The contact lingered, subtle, electric, unspoken yet undeniable. I felt his warmth, steady and grounding, and my chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with fear. "Ilaria," Jasper said softly, his voice careful, measured. No matter what happens, we'll see this through. Together. I nodded, feeling a quiet swell of emotion. Together, I echoed. His eyes held mine, steady and sure, and I realized that this wasn't just about the manuscripts anymore. It was about us, our bond, fragile but growing in intensity, shaped by trust, respect, and the shared pursuit of truth. The night deepened, and the library's hushed halls seemed to shrink around us, cocooning us in a world where only our work and each other existed. Every brush of hands, every shoulder pressed near, every shared glance made the tension between us palpable. I could sense the careful restraint in his posture, the silent acknowledgement that what was happening was more than professional. Finally, we leaned back, exhausted but exhilarated, our work compiled and ready to move to the next stage, public exposure. Jasper's hand rested lightly on mine as he handed me the final binder. I felt his warmth seep into me, a quiet, protective presence that made my heart race. "Whatever comes," he murmured, "we face it side by side." I let my hand linger in his. Side by side. I repeated, the phrase a quiet promise. The city beyond the library's windows sparkled, oblivious to the battle being waged within its walls. And in the quiet glow of desk lamps and stacked manuscripts, I realized that Jasper wasn't just an ally. He was becoming my anchor, my confidant, and perhaps something even more. Something I was beginning to hope for, love. And for the first time since Rhys and Serena's betrayal, I felt the stirring of hope, not just for justice, but for a future I hadn't dared imagine. The morning air was crisp when I arrived at the rival publishing house, carrying a folder that felt heavier than its weight. It wasn't just the evidence inside, it was the anticipation of the confrontation, the stakes climbing higher with every passing day. Jasper was already there, quietly reviewing notes in the corner office, his brow furrowed and his fingers drumming softly against the desk. "Did you find anything overnight?" I asked, lowering my voice as if even the walls could betray us. He looked up, eyes dark with determination, and gave the smallest nod. "Yes." Enough to start connecting the dots. Rhys and Serena are more organized than I anticipated, but their patterns are predictable. They underestimate attention to detail. I slid the folder across the desk to him, fingers brushing briefly against his. The touch, though fleeting, sent a warmth up my arm that had nothing to do with the autumn chill. He didn't pull away, instead holding my gaze for a heartbeat longer than necessary before opening the folder. Hours passed in a tense rhythm of research, cross-referencing, and silent strategy. Occasionally, our hands brushed as we reached for the same document or pen. Each contact was electric, a reminder that beyond the manuscripts and the looming threat, there was a bond forming, quiet, unspoken, yet undeniable. Just as we were compiling the final draft of our exposé, a soft chime echoed from the office phone. Jasper answered, his face tightening as he listened. I couldn't hear the other side, but I knew instantly. Rhys had discovered we were moving against him. "They know," he said finally, voice low, steady. "Serena is mobilizing the house's legal team. They'll try to intimidate anyone who leaks information." I felt a cold shiver run through me, but Jasper's presence next to me was grounding. He placed a reassuring hand on my shoulder, firm and protective. "We're ready for them," he said. His touch lingered a moment longer than required, and I felt my chest flutter, heart pounding in a rhythm that wasn't entirely fear. That afternoon, we left the office to meet a potential whistleblower, an assistant editor who had grown uneasy with the house's unethical practices. Walking through the city streets, I felt Jasper close behind me, a silent shadow of reassurance. At one point, a gust of wind knocked my coat against my arm, and he caught it instinctively, fingers brushing mine. I swallowed, heart hammering, trying to focus on the task and not the warmth of his touch. At the cafe where we arranged to meet the assistant editor, we sat side by side at a small table, papers spread between us. Jasper leaned in, close enough that his arm brushed mine, his presence steadying my nerves. "If anything goes wrong," he murmured, "we leave immediately. Together." "Together," I repeated, the word heavier with meaning than before. Our meeting was tense, the assistant editor nervous, but willing to share evidence of forged reviews and falsified author credentials. As we took notes, I felt Jasper's fingers lightly graze mine again as he passed me a pen. My breath caught, not with fear, but with the awareness of how close we were, how careful and deliberate his movements were. He was always careful, always precise, yet somehow effortlessly protective. When the conversation ended, we walked back to the publishing house, shoulder to shoulder. The city was quiet now, the streets dimly lit. "You did well today," Jasper said softly, his voice low enough that only I could hear. "We couldn't have done this without you." I turned to him, suddenly aware of how close he was. "We did it together," I whispered. His gaze held mine, dark and unwavering, and for a moment, the distance between us dissolved. He leaned slightly closer, enough that I could feel the heat of his body against mine. "Side by side," he said, his hand brushing mine once more, almost casually, yet the intention behind it was unmistakable. My fingers trembled as I allowed the contact, a quiet acknowledgement of the trust and the subtle desire that had grown between us. By the time we returned to the office, we were exhausted but exhilarated. Our first direct strike against Rhys and Serena had succeeded. Evidence was gathered, alliances formed, and the tension between danger and intimacy had never been sharper. I realized something then, in the glow of the desk lamp and the scattered manuscripts. This wasn't just a battle for justice. It was becoming a story about us, our partnership, our trust, and a connection that neither of us could ignore. And in that quiet, charged space, I allowed myself to hope that when the fight was over, we might finally write our own ending, one where truth and love could coexist. The next morning, the air felt heavy, almost charged with the storm I knew was coming. Papers stacked neatly on my desk seemed suddenly fragile, as if one wrong move could scatter the evidence we had painstakingly compiled. Jasper arrived early, carrying 2 cups of coffee, his dark eyes already scanning the room as if reading the future alongside me. "You look tense," he said softly, handing me the cup. His fingers brushed mine, a fleeting contact that sent an unexpected warmth up my arm. I met his gaze, and for a moment, the weight of fear and responsibility lightened, replaced by a quiet intimacy that had been building between us like an undercurrent in the water. "I am tense," I admitted, taking a small sip. "Rhys knows. Serena will try to discredit anyone connected to this." He leaned closer across the table, lowering his voice. "Then we stay ahead. We anticipate every move. We don't react, we control." His presence was a steadying force, as if simply being near him anchored me against the chaos swirling outside the office walls. We dove into our work, cross-referencing the assistant editor's evidence, drafting letters to academic journals, and preparing irrefutable proof of plagiarism. The hours blurred together, punctuated by brief touches, our hands brushing over the same pages, his shoulder occasionally nudging mine. Each contact carried an unspoken acknowledgement of the bond forming between us, quiet but undeniable. Around mid-afternoon, a call came through from one of the journals we intended to notify. My stomach tightened. Rhys had apparently gotten wind of our plans. The editor's voice on the other end was cautious, hesitant even, but the message was clear. Rhys's legal team was threatening to pull support and intimidate anyone connected with the exposé. I felt a cold surge of fear, but Jasper's hand found mine under the table, fingers curling around mine with gentle reassurance. "We anticipated this," he said quietly. "We're prepared." His grip was firm, protective, and the subtle warmth of his touch calmed the panic rising in me. That evening, we decided to work late at the library, away from the direct reach of Rhys and Serena. The familiar scent of old books and polished wood felt like a sanctuary. We spread out the manuscripts, notes, and cross-referenced pages on the long table. I noticed, almost subconsciously, how close Jasper was sitting. There was no reason for our shoulders to touch, but they did, and the contact sent a quiet thrill through me. "Ilaria," he said softly, leaning closer, his dark hair brushing the corner of his forehead. "I can't imagine doing this with anyone else. You make me believe in integrity more than I ever have." His words were earnest, sincere, and my chest tightened in a way that had nothing to do with the evidence before us. I swallowed, feeling the magnetic pull between us. I feel the same," I admitted, voice low. "I trust you more than anyone I've ever known." And my words faltered, caught in the tension that had been quietly building. He reached across the table, fingers brushing mine, deliberately slow, lingering longer than necessary. My breath caught, and I realized this wasn't just about the manuscripts, the battle, or the justice we sought. It was about him, about the safety and warmth he offered amidst the chaos. "I think," he whispered, leaning a fraction closer, "we deserve a moment even here." My heartbeat raced. "A moment," I echoed, the words heavy with implication. His gaze held mine, dark and steady, as if asking permission to cross the unspoken boundary. Slowly, carefully, he leaned in further. I felt the warmth of his breath, the quiet certainty in his proximity, and my fingers instinctively curled around his hand. Our lips met in a slow, deliberate kiss, gentle yet charged, cautious but undeniable. It was a release, a confirmation of the trust and tension that had grown between us, a silent acknowledgement that amidst the danger, something profound had blossomed. I felt his hand cut my cheek, grounding me, offering both protection and connection. Pulling back slightly, we rested our foreheads together, breaths mingling. "We'll face them together," he murmured, voice low, warm. "Together," I whispered back, feeling the fierce certainty of our partnership, both in the fight against Rhys and Serena, and in the fragile, thrilling intimacy now blooming between us. Outside, the night deepened, city lights glimmering like distant stars. Inside, amidst the scattered manuscripts and the faint scent of old paper, I realized that the battle was no longer just for justice. It was for truth, integrity, and a love that had grown quietly, steadily, in the shadows between the stacks. And for the first time, I believed we could win both. The morning air felt electric as we approached the small press, the papers and evidence tucked securely under Jasper's arm. Today, everything would change. Rhys and Serena's carefully constructed house of deceit was about to unravel. My pulse raced, not only from anticipation, but from the quiet awareness that Jasper was beside me, steady and grounding, his presence a tether against the storm of emotions inside me. As we entered the office, the familiar scent of ink and paper welcomed us. The printers hummed softly in the background, and the stacks of journals waited like soldiers poised for battle. Jasper guided me to the large table in the center, his hand brushing mine as he passed me the first printed page. The contact was brief, but lingering enough to make my pulse quicken. I felt a warmth spread through my chest that had nothing to do with the temperature in the room. "Ready?" he asked softly, his dark eyes meeting mine. There was a quiet intensity in his gaze that made my breath hitch. "As ready as I'll ever be," I whispered, leaning closer to him. Our shoulders brushed again, and I could feel the strength and steadiness of him beside me. I wanted to close the distance further, to feel the warmth of his chest against mine, but there were more pressing matters. The exposé had to go live. Hours passed in a blur of activity. Pages were carefully organized, footnotes double-checked, and legal disclaimers meticulously added. Every brush of our hands as we passed documents sparked something electric, subtle but undeniable. At one point, Jasper's hand lingered over mine as he pointed out a critical citation, his thumb grazing the back of my hand. I felt heat rise to my cheeks, my heartbeat quickening. He noticed, and for the briefest moment, a smile flickered across his lips, soft, almost shy, yet charged with unspoken emotion. Finally, the moment came. We uploaded the final document to the journal's portal, confirming every fraudulent claim and providing irrefutable proof. I exhaled sharply, leaning back against the table, chest heaving. Jasper stepped closer, his hand brushing mine again as he adjusted a stack of papers. The closeness, making my stomach twist in a mixture of relief and anticipation. "You did brilliantly," he murmured, voice low, intimate. "We did this together." His thumb brushed across my knuckles, a gentle, lingering contact that sent shivers down my spine. I could feel the heat radiating from him, the quiet promise in his touch. I met his gaze, my voice catching slightly. We couldn't have done it without you." He leaned closer, our foreheads nearly touching, the scent of his cologne mixing with the faint smell of paper and ink. "And I wouldn't want to have done it with anyone else," he said softly. His hand covered mine fully this time, fingers intertwining with mine in a slow, deliberate gesture. My heart raced as I felt the solidity of him, the protection, the steadiness, the warmth. For a moment, the world fell away. The printers hummed quietly, the city outside continued unaware, and all that existed was the space between us, the electricity in our touch, the shared intensity of our victory, and the promise of something more. He leaned even closer, and I could feel his breath against my lips. I closed my eyes, surrendering to the moment, letting the weeks of tension, danger, and shared purpose culminate in this quiet intimacy. His lips met mine in a slow, deliberate kiss, gentle, lingering, filled with reassurance and unspoken desire. My hand rose to rest on his chest, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my palm, grounding me, anchoring me, letting me know that I was safe. When we pulled back slightly, forehead still touching, he whispered, "No matter what comes next, we face it together. And we protect each other." I nodded, my breath mingling with his, chest rising and falling in synchrony. "Together," I repeated, feeling the depth of connection that had grown between us, stronger than fear, stronger than the threat of Rhys and Serena's retaliation. Hours later, as the journal published the exposé, Rhys's house began to crumble under the weight of truth. The emails, messages, and calls flooded in, confirming the impact of our work. And yet, the greatest triumph wasn't just the revelation of deceit. It was the closeness Jasper and I shared, the subtle touches, the quiet intimacy forged through danger, trust, and shared purpose. That night, after the office had emptied, Jasper and I sat together in the quiet glow of the desk lamps. His fingers brushed mine again, lingering longer, and I allowed myself to lean closer, feeling the warmth of him, the safety of him. We had won the battle for truth, but in the quiet aftermath, we had discovered something even more precious: each other. And as we sat side by side, hands intertwined, I knew that this was only the beginning. Not just of justice, but of a love carefully built, steady as the pages of a book that could never be rewritten by betrayal. The morning sun poured through the windows of our small publishing house, warm and golden, casting long, proud shadows across the scattered manuscripts. Today, the world would see the truth, every fraudulent passage, every plagiarized paragraph, every lie that Rhys and Serena had built their empire upon. Jasper and I stood side by side in the office, reviewing the final report one last time. His hand brushed mine as he passed me a folder, lingering for a heartbeat longer than necessary. The touch sent a familiar warmth through me, steady and reassuring. I glanced up at him, catching the quiet intensity in his dark eyes. "We did it," he said softly. "Yes," I whispered, smiling, feeling a sense of triumph I had never known before. Not just for the exposé, but for us, for the partnership, the trust, and the subtle, deep connection that had grown through weeks of danger and devotion. The emails and calls began immediately. Editors confirmed receipt of the report. Academic journals praised the thoroughness and integrity of the evidence. And as Rhys and Serena's fraudulent practices were exposed to the public, I felt a rush of vindication, of justice served floor by deceitful floor. Jasper stepped closer, his hand brushing mine once again. "You've been incredible," he murmured. "Not just in the fight for truth, but for everything else." My cheeks warmed at his words. "We couldn't have done it without each other," I replied. He smiled, a slow, quiet smile that made my chest flutter. Then, with deliberate gentleness, He took both my hands in his, fingers intertwining with mine. "Ilaria," he whispered, leaning closer, "you're brilliant, brave, and more than that, you're mine." My heart raced, but in a different way than it had before. Calm, centered, entirely sure. I leaned into him, resting my forehead against his, feeling the steady beat of his heart beneath my palm. "And you're mine," I whispered back. Our lips met in a slow, lingering kiss, gentle yet filled with the weight of shared battles, quiet trust, and the joy of finally being together without pretense. His hands rested lightly on my back, anchoring me, holding me close. The chaos of the past weeks, the danger, the tension, it all melted away in that single, perfect moment. When we pulled back slightly, still holding hands, the office seemed to glow around us. The sunlight, the scattered papers, the hum of printers, it all felt like a testament to what we had built together. Truth, integrity, and love. Later that evening, we sat together in the quiet library of our new publishing house, shelves filled with our work and the works of others who valued honesty above all. Jasper's head rested gently against mine as we reviewed notes for our next project, our fingers brushing occasionally, each touch a quiet affirmation of what had blossomed between us. I thought of Rhys and Serena. Their empire crumbled, and I smiled softly. Justice had been served. But more importantly, I had found my anchor in Jasper, steady, principled, and utterly devoted. And as the sun dipped below the horizon, casting a warm glow over our shared sanctuary, I realized that this story, the one we had fought so hard to tell, was only the beginning. Not just for truth, but for a love that would last, slow and steady, like the turning of pages in a book written just for us. We had won, together. And now, finally, we could live happily ever after.